Hello and welcome to the PFF Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz, and today we will continue our team preview series with a look at the Buffalo Bills. Make sure you check out the first 17 episodes if you haven't already. Trying to keep these as evergreen as possible throughout the entire offseason and our lead up to week 1. So, without further ado, 2020 Buffalo Bills Fantasy Football Team Preview. Starts with the guy that many at my company, the fine folks at Pro Football Focus, haven't been the biggest fan of, and that's Josh Allen. And, I am a big time, I wouldn't say a truther to Josh Allen as an amazing quarterback, but my goodness, is this guy fun to watch play. Just from an entertainment perspective, I truly believe Josh Allen is a top 5 quarterback in this league. I mean, where else can you find a guy willing to throw the ball 60 yards downfield, double coverage to his fullback, to lateral the ball with 2 minutes left in the actual playoff game over his head blindly to an unsuspecting teammate, and then at the same time, the guy makes a couple throws a game that, outside of Patrick Mahomes, I don't know who else in the league is capable of doing it. So, the arm talent, the athleticism, the DGAF attitude, all just, adds into my love and loyalty to Josh Allen as an entertaining quarterback. Now, the question is, can he become more than just a great fantasy quarterback and, entertaining signal caller in 2020? And they got the right pieces to find out if it can happen. Because, look, Josh Allen's rookie year, really brutal from a passing perspective, but he didn't have anyone. He was throwing the ball to Robert Foster most of the time, and no offense to Robert Foster, but, in 2019, he did a great job adding Smokey Brown, adding Cole Beasley, really retooled the entire offensive line, and Josh Allen took a step forward in almost every single, meaningful statistical metric. So it was good to see him, when the talent level around him raised, so did Allen's performance. Now, the one just huge issue that still persisted last season was his ability throwing deep. Now, we all know Allen can throw the ball out of the stadium seemingly, but the problem is he just hasn't been all that efficient when throwing at least 20 yards downfield. And we had 35 quarterbacks throw at least 20 passes, 20 plus yards downfield. Last season, Allen ranked 32nd in deep yards per attempt, 32nd in deep ball catchable rate, 28th in deep ball QB rating, and 6th in deep ball rate. So he's pretty much like the NFL version of Russell Westbrook in that, like Westbrook is to the three-pointer and Allen is to the deep ball. It's a skill they don't possess, but they really insist on doing it at a real high rate regardless. So you bring in Stefan Diggs, though, who was PFF's single best deep ball receiver last year in receiving yards, on passes thrown 20 plus yards downfield. And it's easy to see how adding someone at Diggs' level could help the one big glaring issue in Allen's game. This has been a situation where it's not all on Josh Allen. And, I would encourage people to check out Seth Galina's recent piece on PFF.com where he kind of breaks down some of the ways the Bills could make the scheme easier on Allen, because if they could just help a little bit in the passing department, he could really take a big step. Has truly a top 5 fantasy season in his range of outcomes, because the rushing usage is there. It's absurd, and it is there. I don't think people realize just how, transcendent almost Allen has been as a rusher. Like, okay, Lamar is the best rushing quarterback in the league, best rushing quarterback ever. It's hard to debate that. But here are the rushing stats through 28 career games. Michael Vick, 184 carries, 1,321 yards, 10 rushing touchdowns. Josh Allen, in his first 28 career games, 198 carries, 1,141 rushing yards, and 17 rushing touchdowns. Truly, the guy is taken off at all moments. He is a handful for guys to get down. He's got speed. He's one of the top guys in the league, regardless of position, just broken tackles per attempt. He's as fantasy friendly as they come. He never checks down. League low 1.3% of his passes in 2019 were checkdowns. That's just 6 of 461 pass attempts. Josh Allen, again, this all leads to the entertainment factor I started with. And, he was the real life 2019 fantasy QB6. So there's a reason why he's being drafted at that spot. It's what he was last year. The rushing upside is ridiculous. If we can just even come close to giving this guy a passing ceiling. This is someone that still hasn't even thrown for 275 yards in a game yet. So imagine if we start getting some 300 plus, yard bonuses for Allen. Ceiling is the roof. I realize the floor, just being kind of this volatile guy. Maybe we see a Trubisky-esque, just year 3 drop off, but, still being in this good team, adding Diggs to the equation, I think it is fair to buy Josh Allen as a top 6 fantasy QB ahead of next season. The backfield is where things get interesting. I mentioned Josh Allen and all of his rushing yards, and that's one thing, but it's really those rushing scores that are so ridiculous. The only guys with more rushing touchdowns than Josh Allen over the last 2 seasons are Todd Gurley, Derrick Henry, Aaron Jones, Christian McCaffrey, Alvin Kamara, Ezekiel Elliott, and Melvin Gordon. That is it. And it's a situation where, yes, Allen is taking off, a lot just on his own in scrambles, but they're also designing him touches near the goal line. And this is why I just can't really get behind Devin Singletary as a guy I'm targeting. He'll get the snaps. He played at least 65% of the offensive snaps in every game in which he wasn't either injured or returning from a layoff. But it's just that upside. I really don't think it's there. He was the PPR RB18 during weeks 7 through 16 last season, and it's just hard for the guy to get touchdowns unless he's going to rip off some massive plays. Josh Allen and Frank Gore combined for 29 rush attempts inside the 10-yard line last season. Singletary had 3. I really think we overrate, the idea of vultures. There's the days of a Mike Tolbert type guy, only coming in inside the 5-yard line really doesn't happen much of anywhere. But in Buffalo, with Josh Allen, he is more or less a vulture for this offense. So I do expect Singletary to remain the lead guy. The problem is, last year, Frank Gore was still flirting with 10 carries per game, and they brought in Zack Moss to replace Gore, which, okay, if he takes 10 carries a game, that's not the worst thing ever for Singletary, but Moss, much more capable receiver seemingly than Frank Gore. Some of these, just advanced metrics for receiving in college really paints Moss in a bright picture. I think some of it had to do with not all that much volume. Obviously college statistics should be taken with somewhat of a grain of salt to begin with, but there's a much higher ceiling for what Moss could do in this offense compared to Gore, which is just bad news for Singletary. I know some of fantasy football Twitter is really starting to get behind Moss. He's cheap enough that he's not worth a dart. I would just caution and expecting any sort of a 3-down roll coming. It's going to be a 2-back committee with Singletary and Moss, with Allen, taking all sorts of rushing uses, especially in the red zone. And even if Singletary goes down, I don't think Moss is going to walk into a feature role. I think we're going to see TJ Yeldon be out there serving as the pass down back, as we saw last season, when one of Gore or Singletary, usually Singletary, was sidelined. So, usually with these backup running backs, I want guys like Latavius Murray, Tony Pollard, Alexander Mattison, Chase Edmonds, guys we can be confident that they're going to get a true 3-down roll if disaster strikes. I'm not sure Moss is going to be that guy. I'm not out on him by any stretch, but I just think, he's definitely not someone I've prioritized in fantasy drafts during this offseason. Moving on to wide receiver. Hell of a situation here because, I love John Brown, and last year Smokey was able to be the PPR wide receiver 20 with, Josh Allen under center and all that, but now we got Stefon Diggs, and, the Vikings traded, 2020 first, 5th, and 6th, and then 2021 4th. The Bills traded those things to acquire Stefon Diggs, so I think it's pretty clear who is going to be the wide receiver 1 in Minnesota. Now, will Diggs get 100, 20 plus targets and Smokey gets only 60, 70? That's the question. And, looking, when I was going through my ranks and kind of comparing them versus ADP, John Brown was a guy I was much lower on than consensus. And a big part of that is just wondering, how is Allen going to be able to kind of enable multiple fantasy relevant wide receivers? And it's kind of a mystery. It could go either way. I could see Diggs being the featured wide receiver 1 here, or I could also see it being more of a 1A, 1B situation. Beasley's hardly out of the picture as well. It's a sneaky, talented, and crowded passing game, where last year, again, Brown was a PPR wide receiver 20 and Beasley was a wide receiver 34. So, I'm coming around more and more to Smokey as a potential, boomer bust, wide receiver 5 or 6 on your team that could wind up, as a wide receiver 3 when everything's all said and done. I don't think Beasley, he just doesn't get the sort of fantasy friendly opportunities that we're going to want to target. Diggs is the one, though, I'm still kind of coming around on because, yes, there's a little concern with, hey, how much is Smokey Brown going to take away from this potential wide receiver one role? But that's already really being baked into Diggs' price. And, I mentioned before, league's single best deep ball wide receiver last season, but that's hardly all Diggs is. He is not a one-trick pony. A lot of people would, I think, have Diggs just in the top 10 of the most talented wide receivers in the league. And, just the amount we were ranking him so much higher in Minnesota when he had to, deal with Adam Thielen and almost split targets right down the middle. So even in those like worst case volume scenarios, Diggs was able to smash what he's being kind of projected to do in Buffalo. And I understand Kirk Cousins to Josh Allen is not ideal for, a fantasy football wide receiver, but I just think the concern over the new spot, the concern with Josh Allen, it's already being baked really heavily into Diggs' price. So, wouldn't go out of my way to draft him early, but, I have seen Diggs in some of these drafts going round 6, round 7 even. And, if you can get Diggs as your wide receiver 4, wide receiver 3 even, I mean, you're feeling good about that 8 days of the week. And at tight end, finally, Dawson Knox, he is fun, people. Like other than Bills fans, maybe you didn't watch a ton of Bills games last year, but Dawson Knox, while he led the position in drops and, needs to improve on some things, I mean, it seemed like every single week he was either making a really good contested catch, he was racking up some yak, or, throwing a really big block. I mean, he just straight up escorted Isaiah McKenzie to a few touchdowns throughout last season with some great lead blocks. So, situation where, okay, who's going to be fourth on this offense in targets? Most likely Knox behind those 3 wide receivers we just talked about. But hey, he is still a tight end that rarely leaves the field. We're expecting 75% plus snaps, and I think he truly is talented. While rookie tight ends never do anything, he did do a little bit, when you watch the film a little bit closer. So I think the thing with Knox is he's being priced, as like the tight end 25, 26, 27 in most drafts you're going into. And yeah, in redraft, one tight end leagues, no, you're not touching Dawson Knox, but especially in these leagues that need 2 tight ends or, tight end premium, or if you're in a situation where, you really let tight ends slide and you're going with 2 or 3 of them, I think he brings a lot of potential to the table in September. I mean, I went through, all these, every tight end group in the league and just took their strength of schedule purely in weeks 1 through 4. I think sometimes, when we use full season strength of schedule, it can be a little bit misleading. But just 1 through 4 is a little more reasonable. And you look at the Jets without Jamal Adams, the Dolphins, the Rams, the Raiders, single best strength of schedule weeks 1 through 4. For Dawson Knox, there are much worse flyers to put out there in September, if you're in one of these deeper tight end leagues. So as for the rankings at quarterback, I have Josh Allen as my QB6, 1 spot behind Deshaun Watson, 1 spot ahead of Russell Wilson. Look, Wilson is like one of the best, shaping up to be truly one of the best quarterbacks we've ever seen. I do not think that is on the table for Allen, no matter how well the rest of his career goes. But in fantasy land, this is what he finished out last year. They added Diggs to the offense, and that rushing upside is just absurd. I mean, Russell Wilson last season had 7 yards on design rushes. It's not just his passing now. Schottenheimer and company are limiting his rushing floor as well. So, yeah, I could see a scenario where they finally unleash Russ, and yeah, he's, equal volume. Obviously, we take Russ over Josh, but there's just so many more fantasy-friendly opportunities for Josh inside that Buffalo offense. I'm riding with him as my QB6. Running back, I have Devin Singletary as my RB24, 1 spot behind Le'Veon Bell, 1 spot ahead of Raheem Mostert. It's tough, and honestly, in this range, I'm trying to get out of drafts with 2 or 3 running backs by the time these guys are on the clock. This is why, unless you're in one of these contrarian or just big tournament leagues, I don't know why, you wouldn't try to get some running backs early, because it just doesn't take long until you see these groups of running backs you're dealing with, and it just gets messy awfully fast. And, I'm fine taking a later round flyer on Moss. It's a situation where, again, I don't think the ceiling is there. I have him as my RB48. 1 spot, behind Boston Scott, 1 spot ahead of Kerryon Johnson. I'm taking the other handcuffs before him. I'm even taking, more pass down friendly backs like James White, Tariq Cohen ahead of Moss. But we'll see what happens. I mean, Singletary did struggle a little bit, stay healthy last year. If Moss is the starting RB in the Bills offense, he's going to be a recommended start more weeks than not. I just think, that RB kind of 18 mark that Singletary had last season, I don't know that we should be expecting too much more from Moss, even if disaster strikes. Wide receiver, I have Stefan Diggs in my wide receiver 21, one spot behind Devontae Parker, one spot ahead of Cortland Sutton. He's the again, should be by just based on that draft capital, based on the talent. Stefan Diggs, the Bills, undisputed number one pass game target. And I'm going to take him ahead of guys like Cooper Kupp, ahead of guys like Metcalf and Lockett, just because I think that when you have that true number one, there's a lot of value there. And I'm also going to take him ahead of, similar number ones like T.Y. Hilton, Keenan Allen, A.J. Green, that I think face much steeper concerns with their quarterback play and things of that nature. John Brown, as I said, a little lower on consensus. I was my wide receiver 53, one spot ahead of Paris Campbell, one spot behind Emmanuel Sanders. It's just wide receivers so loaded this year. I mean, it's not even like I would move him down, but I kind of like the other guys. So, John Brown is just one of those guys where I could see myself being wrong on him. I think he's so talented, but just not really someone I've been coming away with in many drafts. Dawson Knox, my tight end 28, one spot behind Olsen, one spot ahead of Fells. It's just important to remember with these rankings, these are projected full season ones, but we also want to keep, kind of a DFS week by week approach during the season as well. So while I'm not really high on Knox breaking out of this crowded passing game and having a huge season, I do think he can provide some underrated spike weeks, particularly in September. So the win total, they are sitting at 9. Patriots also at 9. Seems like the 1 year in the AFC East where the Patriots are vulnerable, could be knocked off. I mean, this Bills defense with Trey White, Edmonds in the middle, they are just nasty. Defensive line improving as well. It's a tough one, guys. I think the win total is spot on. I am going to lean towards the under. It seems like an 8-8 team to me. I'm a little pessimistic on Josh Allen's chances at, putting everything together and being a great real life quarterback this season, even if he can continue to be a fun guy for fantasy and entertainment purposes. Just not all that convinced that he'll be putting it together. As I mentioned, the Patriots pod, I'm going back to with Belichick, and I understand the Patriots defense is weaker, questions with Cam Newton under center, but I just still think this is the Patriots division, and, to see the Bills at 9 wins, little too high for my liking. Wouldn't bet the bank on the under, but I will be taking under 9 wins for the Buffalo Bills in 2020. Apologies, Bills Mafia. I do not hate you guys. I hope I'm wrong. Josh Allen is so much fun, but under 9 wins is my bet. So that was the podcast. Thank you all for listening. Buffalo Bills 2020 Fantasy Football Team Preview. I am Ian Hartitz, and until next time, take care, everyone.
Thanks for watching the PFF YouTube channel, and if you want to subscribe, all you have to do is push the button. Don't forget everything you get. A little fantasy, push the button. A little green line for the gambling aspects of the game, push the button. College football, push the button. The YouTube channel from PFF.